you with Giving Circles, and we can help you start your own. So if you are not yet part of a Giving Circle, don't forget to reach out to us. I am personally interested in social justice. My own Giving Circle has been supporting social justice nonprofit organizations in the San Francisco Bay Area since 2014. So that makes me even more excited to host this conversation here at Philanthropy Together. I'm partnered with a group of super esteemed friends who are working to put together the Social Justice Giving Circle project. Mario Lugay, Seiji Carpenter, Ligia Gong, and Joel Asaro Berman. This group are friends, are teachers, and all around powerhouses. So to get us started, I am going to pass it to Ligia Gong, member of the Rad Fund Giving Circle in New York City. Welcome, Ligia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Sara, and thanks everyone for being here with us today and sharing your time and presence with us in this virtual space. As Sara has said, the Social Justice Giving Circle project has really come together to explore the relationship between giving circles and today's social justice movements, both how that relationship currently exists or maybe doesn't, and what's possible in the future. We are really so thrilled to be working in partnership with Philanthropy Together, and so grateful for the incredible work that they're doing in this field. As part of this Social Justice Giving Circle project, we are asking a lot of questions and engaging social justice organizers, Giving Circle leaders and practitioners, and more. Throughout the past few months, we have met virtually with folks we admire deeply and heard from them about how they understand the relationships between giving, social justice, and politics. And I imagine that's why you're here with us today, is you're interested in these things. This first event kicks off our effort to share our exploration and learning and to expand the conversation and learn with all of you. And part two, this is part one of a two-part series, will follow in late January to continue that conversation. In particular, in part two, we are going to hear more from Giving Circle practitioners that are trying to ask and answer some of the questions that will be raised today in this conversation. We hope you will join us then. We really see these two conversations as part of the same dialogue. And more information will be coming on that second follow-up event. Also, as part of this project, we are conducting a survey to learn more from all of you. We are going to share the link for the survey at the end of the webinar and encourage all of you who are in Giving Circles and interested in social justice to please fill it out. Seiji Carpenter will also be sharing a little bit more about the survey at the very end. So with that, I will no longer stand in the way of Mario and the amazing panelists and turn it over to them.
Thank you, Ligia. So to start, there's over 100 people, I think, signed on and over 200 people who've registered. So let's engage in some collective action and start with a shared exercise. I'm going to invite everyone to participate. And it's an exercise I like to do in every training that I do, whether it's a training on community organizing or with community foundations. First, I'll ask all of you, wherever you are, to get in a comfortable position, maybe let go of anything in your hands. Then close your eyes and just start taking a few deep breaths. Take a deep breath with a long exhale to let go of all the busyness that came before this. And a deep exhale to give yourself the space to be fully present for this conversation. Now I'm going to invite you to remember back in the day to a younger version of yourself, specifically a version of yourself without the politics and perhaps the values that you have and hold today. A version of yourself much earlier in your civic and political journey. It might even be a version of yourself you would be a little embarrassed to have sharing their political views today. Now remember some of the people who came into your life and helped shape you and move you from that younger version of yourself to who you are today. They could be partners or professors, classmates or colleagues, friends or family members, organizers or mentors. Now think about one of those people who played a significant role in moving you from where you were to where you are today. Now open your eyes, find a pen, piece of paper, a Post-it, and write down thank you, comma, and the name of the person you just thought about. Normally, this would be the moment when we would go into breakout rooms and where we would allow each of you to introduce yourselves to one another and to this space, leading with gratitude by going around and saying thank you, the person's name you just wrote down, and why you're thanking them, as if they were in the room. In lieu of this, given the size of this group, I'm going to invite the speakers to share their gratitude. I'll start with Lumumba, then we'll go to Priscilla, Joo-Hyun, and then Eric. Lumumba, will you turn on your video and share your gratitude?
Absolutely. Good evening. Good evening. Asante sana, which is Swahili for thank you. Asante sana Nahanda Abiodun. Nahanda Abiodun was a freedom fighter in the New African and Black Liberation Movement. Nahanda was charged with a host of federal and state charges because of her role in our freedom movement. She lived in exile in Cuba, where she passed away in 2019. One of her charges was assisting in the liberation of Assata Shakur. I thank Nahanda for charging me with a task that resulted in the creation of the Black August Hip Hop Project, and also challenging me to be the best version of who I am and reminding me of where I come from. She reminded me as an adult that she knew me as a child, and something I did not know. So I thank her for being in my life, and her spirit continues to live with me. So Asante Sana, Nahanda Abiodun.
Thank you. Priscilla?
Hi, thank you so much for this great question. I've really been blessed with so many wonderful people, including the folks on this panel who impacted my political journey. I really thought long and hard about this, and I went back to my first teacher, my mom, who through all the hacks and hustles that she did and thought of to keep us fed and safe, I learned a critical lesson that I have taken into organizing with me and that I still lean on, which is that our people, my people, are not victims to be saved, but that we are drivers of change. And it's just such a critical community organizing tenet, and that, you know, what we need is to build people power. So I really hold that, and it drives me and centers me every single day.
Awesome. Thank you, Priscilla. Joo-Hyun?
Sorry, I'm getting my video for some reason. Thanks so much also for that question. I really loved Lumumba and Priscilla's responses. There's, like Priscilla, I have a lot of folk that I feel like have impacted me. One that I'll name right now is Sylvia Rivera, who was a Puerto Rican trans woman in New York, who was also a Stonewall vet, who helped to really spark what's known as the modern day LGBTQ and gender nonconforming movement. And I think one of the ways in which she impacted me, she's one of the few people in my life who I allowed to call me JK and not call me by my name, Joo-Hyun, if they can't pronounce my name. She was probably the first and one of two who were allowed to do that. But one of the things that I really got impacted with her and working with her was that she helped to embody how one person could really inspire and move other people to join organization and movements, not necessarily formal organizations, not 501c3s, but come together in collective action to really make a difference in ways that would be felt for generations. So thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you, Joo-Hyun. Eric?
Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you all. I am going to thank our host and moderator, Mario Lugay. And I'm going to do that because, you know, oftentimes when we think about the people who shape us, we think about our mentors, we think about, you know, the older generation, but I am profoundly shaped by the people who look to me for mentorship. And when I think about having met Mario right after like the 9/11 period, or right during 9/11, he in his early 20s or just 20, maybe you were still a teenager, I don't know. I won't give away your age on this panel. And me in my mid 20s, and then Mario looking to me for mentorship, I was humbled by it. I was humbled by the idea that I had an opportunity to kind of pursue questions for myself, as well as for a younger, quote unquote, generation of activists that were also trying to figure things out. And so Mario has shaped me because he's always pursued the next question. He hasn't rested on, you know, old formulas, and he's always pushing us to kind of think about what comes next, including the topic of today's conversation. So thanks, Mario.
Thank you, Eric. Of course you did that. Because what I'm about to do now is thank you, Lumumba, for being my first supervisor. I thought what I needed to pay close attention when I first started working with you was how you delivered speeches on outdoor stages, or how you ran in Racial Justice 9/11 Coalition meeting, but you taught me that what mattered was showing up, particularly when other people might not be, whether that's through your continued fight for the freedom of our political prisoners, or through Malcolm X grassroots movement's decades-old Cop Watch program, just showing up for people who might have thought themselves forgotten or alone and certainly vulnerable. Thank you, Priscilla, for having shown me how to always return to and honor our family's strengths and struggles through our dedication to this work, something I think so much about now that my own mom and sister have passed. Thank you, Joo-Hyun, for teaching me about political homes, and more so for having been the welcoming political home to so many of us. This may sound like an insult, but it's not. I love talking with others about you almost as much as I love talking with you. And thank you, Eric, for being a best friend, a best man, and the Asian American male role model and mentor I needed, full of strength and heart and humor. I like to do this exercise for a few reasons when introducing people to social justice. One, because one of the greatest dangers we face in this work is falling towards self-righteousness, to ever act as if we were born with the politics and values that we have today, to use social justice as a weapon rather than an invitation to people still early in their political journeys. This exercise reminds us that we weren't born with these politics or values by reminding us of a time before we had them. And that if we ever did act as if we were, we would be making the person we just thanked in some ways invisible. A second reason I like to do this exercise is because one of the things that most captivated me about community organizing and social movements was its concern for legacy as much as impact. Impact will be the laws you get passed, the resources you mobilize, the campaigns you win, but your legacy as an organizer, your legacy in social justice is about whether or not in an exercise like this, 20 years from now, someone would be thanking you for your impact on them. Our legacy as organizers is tied to the personal transformation you allow others to have and the ways you allow this to transform you. Lastly, I wanted to bring this exercise here today because so much about giving circles is a focus on aggregation of people, of money. But I hope this exercise primes us when thinking about the relationship between giving circles and social justice, that it's not just about aggregation, that the power and dynamism of movements lie not just in the aggregation of a critical mass of individuals, but within that aggregation, how far have those individuals progressed on their respective individual and collective journeys in becoming, as Grace Lee Boggs said, more human beings. It's the difference between a congregation of parishioners that only come together over the holidays versus one whose members regularly attend services, building community and belonging and power along the way. To end this exercise, we usually go around and have everyone do thank you in just the name. I asked the people who are attending, who are here joining us today, invited in the spirit of mutuality with the speakers, to type into the chat, thank you, and a name of a person who you are thankful for. We're grateful that each and every one of you are here with us today. So we're also grateful for all the people that you're thanking now and for their part in bringing you here to us. And then as you share your thank yous with us, I just have a couple notes about the design of this event and of our project. The reason I accepted this invitation to participate is because what makes Giving Circles so captivating from a social justice perspective is not the money, but the intimacy between its members who explicitly want to use their agency to affect change in the world and building relationships to fulfill that desire. Intimacy is the seed from which you want collective action to grow, and it's only ever collective action that changes the world. In choosing our speakers today, we look for people whose own political journeys overlapped in struggles on a range of issues, including through the Coalition Against Police Brutality in the late 90s and early 2000s, and whose relationship and history with one another would reflect that powerful element of intimacy found in giving circles. Second, they say if you design for everyone, then you end up designing for no one. So for the purposes of today, we chose to design for those individuals earliest in their political journeys, perhaps motivated by the conditions and political openings of this year, considering how they want to now use various strategies and tactics to impact change and what they themselves want their legacy over time to be. The ability to participate in social justice movements and the shaping and reshaping of society itself is a privilege, and this is our way of extending that privilege to those who may not yet have been invited in. Lastly, these speakers, as you probably can tell now, are people I love, admire, and owe so much to. The last thing I would want is for this webinar to be another exercise in consumption, as so often happens in webinars, with the audience only considering the value of the content that's being shared. This last design consideration is actually an ask to all of you participating to not just listen, but to experience who Lumumba, Priscilla, Joo-Hyun, and Eric are as people and as a community, and to consider whether these are the types of people you might want to spend more time with, or even want to become more like, as I have. In another era, gatherings like this happen in living rooms with food and drinks and dumplings and friends of friends, interweaving ecosystems of change. At the center of them were endless conversations and debates about how the world was and how we wish it to be. Today, we'll see how far we get with the time that we have. But I've also always found it helpful, maybe freeing in some way, to imagine that whoever we meet in life, we'll meet again later. And we hope that we'll meet all of you again soon enough. And with that, I will invite Lumumba to start us off. Lumumba from the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement. And as you saw, Seiji, thank you, in the chat, shared bios of all the speakers. We invite Lumumba to talk about the strategic importance of social justice for you, and specifically for you, the role and importance of movements.
Wonderful, thank you, Maria. And your attempt to get us to tear up, I want you to know, has failed. We are standing strong and firm. We holding it together, yes. But yeah, thank you seriously for inviting us to be a part of this. And for those of you who may not know, it's been probably maybe a decade, maybe more, since the four of us have shared space together. So this is significant, and so we're thankful for that. So I want to just share really quickly why social justice, and equally as important, why movements. I teach a community organizing class at City University of New York, and I really try to push this concept called communal responsibility. And communal responsibility talks about the responsibility of individuals to contribute to the development, tangible development of the shared spaces that they occupy. And when we talk about communities, recognizing that we belong to many different communities, but at no point do we just consume the benefits of being in community without recognizing or even doing the process of contributing back. And it's not a process of charity. It's not a process of doing this because I have made it. It's a process of recognizing that we are all mutually bound together. We belong to each other. If someone in my community is hungry and I have food and I do not feed that person, our community has failed. So we have a responsibility to do that. And so when we talk about movements, what is really important, I just want to really quickly just correct, I think, the bio that was there, that I'm formally of the Movement for Black Lives, but the organization, the Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, is sitting on a leadership body in M4BL, and so that is somewhat correct. But I used to be the Strategies and Partnerships Director. But one of the things that we talk about in M4BL is the question that we ask ourselves when we come together in coalition, in broader movement space, is what can we do together that we cannot do apart? What can we accomplish collectively that would not be possible, or that would be far more challenging if we attempted to do this on our own in isolation? And we are recognizing that this year, 2020, has been, if I'm allowed to speak clearly, a cluster, you know what, in so many different ways, but it has also been historic, particularly for the Black freedom movement. For the first time in the history of this country, we have seen close to 26 million people over this summer alone participate in some form of resistance. That's never happened. That's never happened. For many of us who have been pushing this idea of reinvesting state, city, and federal resources into community needs, into human service needs that we call invest, divest, has now picked up steam under the name of defund, that it actually had an impact on the presidential election. That's huge. The fact that we actually have municipalities across the country who are now implementing defund policies, right? That is huge. So we are making history, and we are doing it because organizations who were doing this individually and in isolation came together and collectively applied our imagination, our creativity to transform the world that we saw needed to be transformed. On a smaller level, in New York City alone, the people that you see on this particular screen were a part of a coalition called the Coalition Against Police Brutality. And we helped to create a new dynamic for what police reform work looked like in New York City, under the leadership of someone who I actually thought we all were going to end up thanking, which is why I didn't choose him, under the leadership of a man by the name of Richie Perez, who recognized that we have that same responsibility to each other, even if we don't have the same ethnic communities, racial communities that we share. As people of color, as people, working class people in New York City, people who are receiving the brunt of the racist, militaristic policing tactics, that we were responsible for being about the process of changing that reality. And we did that. We're doing that, and we're committed to doing more of that. And so when you talk about giving, many of us were able to do that with very little resources. Many of us were forced to do that, in fact, working out of basements of our homes. We didn't have office spaces. We didn't have the resources that many of us have now. But what we did have was the human resources. We had the human capital. We had people that came committed, people that learned together, that committed themselves to growing politically and executing the strategies that we spent late nights developing. And that has laid the stage for what we now see that Joo-Hyun is running, in fact, as the director of Communities United for Police Reform, the most comprehensive police reform coalition in the country, right? And so it's a direct connection. And that happens because we are able to make sure that we tap into our resources as humans, as folks in our communities, but also making sure that our community bases are also providing financial resources, right? And so the idea of what we do, how we function, how we live, how we show up in this year, if nothing else, has taught us that we are connected. It's taught us that in some very brutal and deadly ways. COVID has shown us that we are connected, right? But we have connections to each other, and we have deeply, deeply a responsibility to make sure that we are advancing our humanity. We're advancing our communities. We're advancing our lives together. And so our movements have historically been the space to do that. And we have so much more that we have to do. So I'm really glad that we have an opportunity to talk about this space, talk about that in this space, because we absolutely need to make sure that our movements moving forward are resourced, and making sure that when we're doing it not from the position of charity, but recognizing that we are actually connected.
Thank you, Lumumba. I'll pass it to Priscilla. So Lumumba shared a little bit about movements. What's the role of, in Priscilla, in your response, you work for Mijente, which sees itself as a political home. So what's the role of political homes of organizations within social justice?
Yeah, I mean, in these many years of doing social justice work and doing movement work, I've had many political homes, some of which I shared with folks on this panel. They've been places where I've sharpened my understanding of the world, where I've been challenged to speak up when silent, to show up for others by falling back, to struggle and debate strategy and tactics in ways that honor our respective dignity and that push forward our collective goals. It's where I've learned about democratic processes, helping build collectives and co-ops and experimenting with horizontal versus hierarchical structures. It's where I learned to hypothesize and also wrap my head around the theories and the histories that inform my practice as an organizer. As you mentioned, Mario, I'm my home base. I still have a couple of other home bases, but right now I'm at Mijente, and want to just offer that up as one example of an organization that is very explicit about building a political home. We were founded in 2015. It's a digital and grassroots hub for Latinx and Chicanx movement building and organizing. We have members across the country and work closely with local groups and organizations that we consider the boots on the ground or the brick and mortar in the field. And we were founded because the co-founders saw a gap in Latinx organizing infrastructure nationally, particularly there being a lack of radical, progressive vehicles that were ready and willing to really push back against the status quo and respond to the growing threats to our community. We describe ourselves as a political home that is very explicitly pro-Black, pro-queer, pro-woman, pro-planet, pro-worker, because our people are all of that and so much more. And we have a core set of principles that we stand by. But one that I want to mention specifically that I think you alluded to, Mario, at the beginning, is that we believe very much that we don't only need more of us, but we actually need more from us. And for that to materialize, for us to become people who make things happen rather than those that things just happen to, we have to organize. And so this is where the political home or the political casita becomes really critical, because it's a dedicated space within broader movements where we can find refuge, where we can refuel, reimagine, and conspire with others, where we put into practice what we say we believe in, where you find your people who commit to having your back, where we promise not to leave anybody behind, and where we meet you where you're at and support you to enter and engage at multiple levels. That's not to say that there isn't internal struggle or that it's all smooth sailings or that we don't, have our own contradictions and have missteps, but that's the intention. And it's worth a shot to try to find and build political home. Mijente borrowed a framework from the Movimiento de Pobladores en Lucha from Chile to help us get oriented in the battlefield, understanding that there's different arenas in which to contest for power. So that's against the state, it can be within the state and outside of the state. So whether your vibe is policy or corporate campaigns or electoral work, mutual aid, healing justice, art and cultura, there's a place for you to grow and contribute, or better yet, as one of our co-founders and the current director of Mijente, Marisa Franco, likes to say, make a play. toward that horizon, toward that future of liberation for us all. And to be clear, for Mijente or for any political home that I've been a part of, it's not just about seeking to simply advance the rights of whomever you consider your people to be, but it's about being explicit about organizing and building organizations toward a broader multiracial, multinational movement for racial, economic, gender, climate justice. To me, at the end of the day, building the political home, as Lumumba was saying, is about showing up for each other. Capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, all of these systems were set up for a very select few to thrive and for the many, 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 many of us to languish. Political homes teach us that change is up to us, and that we're looking for those who are looking for us.
Thank you. That was incredible. Next, I'd love to turn it over to Joo-Hyun to, as we're going from macro to micro, talk about kind of the role of individuals. And just to say, I will never forget when Joo-Hyun walked into the volunteer committee that I was coordinating as the former executive director of the Audre Lorde Project. And she walks in and I was like, oh my gosh, you're way overqualified to be in here. Please take over the meeting. And you looked at me and you taught me in that moment about why you were there. And you said, listen, this isn't about qualified or not qualified or anything like that. I'm still being asked to speak, to be out in the world. And if I'm going to do that, I want to make sure the work that I'm doing is benefiting a community, is responsive to a community. And so I'm showing up here to be connected to this community. And that was just transformative. And I come back to it every day. So yeah, Joo-Hyun.
So Mario's still trying to make us cry. I'm going to resist along with Lumumba. But I think this question about what's the role of individuals in movements and organizations is a huge one, of course. And I think even though it's the more micro question, I feel like we've got to start a little bit macro to acknowledge the conditions that we're in right now, the 2020 period, the fact that it's not only about the Trump era where there's been a exposure of the crisis of what white supremacy expanded looks like and the reconsolidation of capital as well as power in the hands of a few. It's also and it's not only the moment of COVID. I'm in New York City, I'm in Brooklyn. We've had close to 25,000 deaths from COVID that were counted in New York City. We've had over 300,000 in the country. I would imagine that most of us have been impacted by that, whether it's family members or community members. And I think that this moment actually shows us what the role of individuals can be, because in spite of all of that, what we have seen is not only the 26 million people resisting this year and engaging in collective action to really confront what kind of state violence they were experiencing and seeing in our own communities, but also individuals who were doing things like creating mutual aid networks, joining giving circles, creating and participating and learning how to do transformative justice pods. All of that, I think, is part of what the role of individuals is. And that in this moment, I think part of the question that we have to ask ourselves as individuals who have choices about where we put our political labor, where we put our political time, is the question about what are the contributions we're willing to make, what are the contributions we're willing to help lead on, as well as what are the ways in which we're willing to co-learn in every space that we're in, to learn, to transform ourselves, to help transform each other, and to recognize that this project, if we're talking about it, for those of us, I think all the panelists, I know you well enough to know that I think I can say we all believe in a project towards liberation for all people. It's not a project towards just betterment and improvement. It's actual transformation and liberation. And what that means is that we don't take for granted that the word movement has a value. It's actually value neutral. There are right-wing movements. There are movements that are trying to kill us. And so I think for us, part of the role of individuals needs to be tied to how we understand how we're going to build out and operationalize what it means to have democratic action at every level. And I don't mean big D, I mean little d. and the question of what's the world we want to live in and how do we start to create it now, every day, every time we wake up in the morning, what are we doing that day to really try to create the world that we want to be in and contribute to a movement. I'm a big believer in the idea of organization. And by organization, I don't mean 501c3 organizations necessarily. Not all organizations are actually movement organizations, but I do believe in people being organized. And that could be a group of 5 people who coordinate a mutual aid network. That could be a group of 10 people on the block who are coordinating childcare for folks in the neighborhood. That there's so many ways in which we can take collective action and so many possibilities every day. And the more we can open that up for each other and be humble enough to know that if we're willing to, we can learn through every interaction of that and also continue to transform ourselves. I feel like that's part of the question. I think the last thing is part of Mario's question was, what do movements ask from people? And I think that part of what those of us who are participating in movements ask of each other is to try to take risks. That doesn't mean to do things that we can't do. That doesn't mean to do things that we're not comfortable with, but to take risks in the service of building a world that we want to live in where everyone is free and has their basic needs met.
Thank you, Joo-Hyun. With that, I'll turn it over to Eric.
So one of the things that I really appreciated about my time working with my comrades, my fellow panelists today, was their appreciation for the different energies that a movement takes. And what I mean by that is, I think the long meetings we had often had to do with how we sustain what I'm going to call the insurrectionary energy of people at a given moment, while at the same time moving towards something that is about knowing what we want. And without drawing too sharp a distinction, I do want to say that there is like this unpredictable moment when things just kind of break open. And we saw that this spring, right? Where people feel this insurrectionary energy, this insurrectionary joy that we as organizers couldn't really predict, but it happens. And then as organizers, as people who believe in organization, we then want to find a way to move that to the next level, as it were, to kind of develop goals or demands or key strategies. And that's important. That's the work. But there might be a tension between that and sustaining the insurrectionary energy, right? Like too much consolidation, too many meetings, too much codification might take us away from the joy, the kind of ecstatic nature of just being in insurrectionary mode, which oftentimes is about not really knowing what comes next or not knowing exactly what you want, right? And so what I think the organizers who influenced me the most attempted to do was balance that out, was help us get to the next level organizationally without tamping down on this kind of more unformed, undisciplined, if you will, insurrectionary energy. And what I think is so interesting about the conversation we're going to have tonight is that these giving circles, these alternative ways of raising money, in my view, can actually sustain the insurrectionary phase and extend that phase because they're more agile, they're more versatile. To be more concrete about it, let's think about these bail funds that people came together and formed really quickly as arrests were being made in cities across the country. You immediately saw people saying, oh, we got to direct money towards, Oakland or Seattle or Portland, right? That's a giving circle, mobilizing cold hard cash quickly to defend insurrectionaries is the kind of versatility, is the agility that I think is so interesting. And without, making a blanket criticism of large philanthropic organizations, they just don't have that agility. There's just too much going on, too many conversations that need to happen before you can move that money directly to the insurrectionaries, right? And so I think, what I appreciate about this conversation again is our ability to think about how we fund both sides of the movement, the insurrectionary side, as well as like the long-term kind of vision, transformative, here's the strategy, here are the goals side of things. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you all. Our next question, we'll do about 2 minutes each, comes out of a definition of political journeys that there's many definitions of political journeys, but the one I like to come back to, and that I hope for many of you who are early on this call, is that it starts with some unsustainable feeling, anger, sadness, guilt, disappointment with the world, which leads you to seek out others who share these unsustainable feelings, to commiserate, to talk with. But along the way, you run into people like these people in front of you who share this feeling, but who seem to have also paired it with much more sustainable feelings: agency, community, love, joy. And you find yourself suddenly attracted to being around them. You come back to them, and at some point there's a moment of self-reflection where you love who you are, meeting up with your college friends, having brunch with your colleagues, but you love who you are when you're with these sets of folks who are able to pair, not run away from those unsustainable feelings about the world, but pair them with more sustainable feelings. And you decide it's who you want to be in community with and what you want to be proud of yourself about. So with that, my question to all of you is now kind of moving and introducing the concept of love. Like, what do you each love about participating in social justice movements and communities? Why do you think others, or what do you think others on this call might fall in love with as well, in that spirit of movements as being irresistible, which I think Kate Bombara first said. Adrienne Marie Brown writes a lot about that as well. Let's start with Eric, and then we'll go Priscilla, Lumumba, Joo-Hyun.
That's a great question. And as you were asking that question, I thought of my daughter, who's now 16, going on 25. And one of the things that I think that interests me about her is her kind of understanding of what it means to be woke, right? And, you know, these debates we have at the kitchen table about like what the latest debate over social media is with her and her peers, and, you know, who's getting shut down and who's getting, you know, amplified. And I ask her, you know, do you consider this, without being condescending, do you consider this, you know, your political engagement at some level? And, you know, she kind of went through how, yes, it could be, but how it's also limited. But ultimately, I think what we landed on is, are you finding joy and real pleasure in collaborating with other people to figure out what we're doing together, right? There's something remarkably gratifying about the collaborative nature of movement building and of activism. And I told her, you know, what I miss most about being more active wasn't, you know, the long meetings or, you know, the titles that came with being part of organizations, but the moments in which we got to improvise and be creative and cooperate with each other, you know? And that could take the form of something really exciting and fun, like, you know, taking over a bridge, doing a sit-in, right? Calling our good friend Kamau Franklin, because yet again, Eric Tang found a way to get arrested, even when he didn't want to be, right? I mean, like, these were certainly fun things to do, but they brought a certain pleasure and a joy because they were done in collaboration with others, right? And that was the kind of love-driven politics that I think defines movements. Like, we weren't really sure what would be the best thing to do in this moment, but we worked it out together, and you could only work it out together, right? That creative process that attends to movements is exactly the kind of thing that you saw this past spring across the country. You know, these groups that are coming together to figure out how to take over a major thoroughfare in Minneapolis, or take over a police precinct, which, and I've studied these major disorders since 1967, has never been done before. No one has ever taken a police precinct like they did in Minneapolis. That takes coordination, takes planning, it takes improvisation, but it also takes people really wanting to do this together and enjoy themselves in the process. So that's my best way of answering that question, Mario, of what, like, you know, love and a feeling other than despair and anger has to do with building movements.
Thank you. I think it said Priscilla next, and then Lumumba and Joo-Hyun.
Yeah, I came up in a Catholic home, and all that, you know, all the restrictions and the judgments that come along with that. And so one of the many things that I love about social justice movements and organizing is the permission to be bad, like the permission to go against the grain, to go against the status quo, and just cultivate radical possibility and be 1,000% who you are, and that informs. It informs how we show up for each other. It informs how we fight for policies to make sure that you know, it doesn't sell one group up the, you know, down the river over another. You know, it communicates to the world that we believe that all of our people, you know, whether you're undocumented or you got a record, or, you know, all of the things that society, you know, all the communities or categories that society puts our people into and slaps the label of like irredeemable, expendable. We say out loud, we're all worthy of dignity and respect. And when we lead, which doesn't have a direct translation in English, but it's the right to live a life with dignity. And we defend that. And that's what I love about our movements. And the other thing that I love, just to lift this up, is that in no other realm can we feel that change is really possible, and that, like, you know, everyday folks, our neighbors are making this happen. I had spent 10 years organizing with domestic workers, and, you know, everybody on this panel was part of that movement in one way, shape, or form. And, you know, that was we fought for 6 long years to establish the nation's first piece of legislation that would recognize domestic workers as real workers. And when we won, that victory was indisputably domestic workers. It was my mom's, it was the women like her across New York and across the country. So much so that, you know, as like the governor was signing the bill into law, felt the need to articulate that the victory belonged to the domestic workers that dreamed and planned and organized. And I have that memory and those words seared into my brain. And that's what I also think is, you know, organizing just expands the realm of what's possible and lets us feel the power that we all have as individuals, as Joo-Hyun was talking about, but just the amazing and incredible things that we can make happen when we come together and organize.
Thank you. Lumumba.
Thanks for that. I'm going to build on what both Eric and Priscilla shared, but take it from, I guess, the other end, in that the love that we're talking about is not something that is experienced immediately. That's something that's earned. And it's earned by experiencing the struggles of campaigns, everything that comes with that, the victories, the defeats, the critiques, all of that. Over time, the kind of relationships that are created, that are the bonds that are made, is where you find that love. It's not something that you just, you know, you enter something and you expect it to be that. That's not going to happen. that's not going to happen. Like anything worthwhile, it's earned. It's earned. So I wanted to make sure we share that, because people can become discouraged with the defeats, with the challenges that are sure to come. Because if it does not come, you're doing something wrong. You're doing something wrong. If everything is always victories, you're always right. No, I don't know about that. Something's not right. But when you get bruised knees together, when you get knocked upside your head together, when you do all of these things together, that's where the love exists. That's where the bonds, the connections that you have to people exist. The fact that all of us come from a very small but really tight-knit coalition that people on the outside thought was an organization in itself, really speaks to the kind of bonds that were created. When I would say that, yeah, I actually trust Joo-Hyun with my life. I trust Eric with my life. I trust Priscilla with my life. It's not something I would just say. It's because we've been in positions where, yeah, if they don't have my back, that could be my life, but they have really exhibited that they got my back, right? And so I think having experienced those kinds of things is where the love lies. Like a romantic relationship, you're going to go through those trials and tribulations, but when you get there, that's where the meat is. That's where it really, really exists. And so you have to earn that, and you have to make sure that you cultivate it and sustain it.
You forgot to mention me, Lumumba.
Yeah.
You trust me, right? I just want to be clear.
Look, you got me on a Tuesday night. Yeah, man, I trust you now.
Awesome. Joo-Hyun?
I was just trying to figure out if I trust Mario. Of course I do, Mario. I want to take a different approach if it's okay. I feel like there's the question of what do I love about movements? And in my mind, when I'm thinking about that and the movements that I love, it's really the movements, the social justice movements, and the parts of those social justice movements that see themselves as radical liberationist social justice movements. I'm not so in love with kind of the liberal movements who just want to do some small improvements and tweak people's lives. And I think for me, some of that is values, but some of that is also organization. I think the movements are incredibly messy, and I love the messiness of it because it gives us the opportunity to be intentional about what do we want to dismantle and what do we want to create. It gives us the ability to be generative around what is the community building we want to do and what's the experimentation we want to do. And what I love about spaces that are trying to be part of much broader scale mass movements to really transform our communities is that it gives opportunities for us to really be willing to struggle with each other. Meaning like I don't love every moment of movement. I don't love every moment that I've spent with Lumumba, Eric, Priscilla, or Mario. But I love them. I trust them implicitly. And that the space to be able to struggle, to disagree, to learn from that disagreement, to theorize, to practice together, whether or not it's getting arrested on the streets or Eric taking over a Board of Ed meeting to stop the city from having the NYPD start to police schools in the late 90s, it gives us an opportunity to reflect and really embody what it means to transform ourselves in the world. And I love the laughter. And I love that, there's a lot of culture of appreciation that I think we cultivate in loving movement spaces, which doesn't mean that they're always agreeable movement spaces, but it means that there's a center of love that we keep there.
And if I could though, wouldn't that, Joo-Hyun, distinguish though the liberation movements from the right-wing movements ultimately? I mean, like I hear you that there are right-wing movements, but there's an aspect of them that is driven, I think, more by fear and authoritarianism, not by the kind of creativity and love that drives some of the work that those of us who believe in liberation are concerned about. I mean, I think that might be the defining feature, to not disagree with your point that there are right-wing fascist reactionary movements, but ultimately, I don't know that they share in the same, emotional and psychological world that we're describing here.
I mean, there are also moderate movements that don't share the same values of trying to cultivate all of our best selves. And so I totally agree with you, Eric. I think that what we're trying to strive towards is building a transformative movement that is able to win, that's effective, but that also tries to live our values every day.
Thank you. We have one more question left, but we're going to take a quick time out. I'm going to introduce co-collaborator Seiji to mention a survey that we put together. We'll kick it back to Sara to close, and then whichever speakers could stay will answer the quick last question.
Thanks very much, Mario, and to all of our panelists. It's really so inspiring to hear these stories and hear from a group of people who've had such formative and collective experiences together within movements in the kind of different social justice issues that we've touched upon. When we kind of started this project, this idea of exploring the intersection between social justice and giving circles, we knew that we as individuals had a set of experiences in social justice, in movements, and more recently for some of us in giving circles. And we kind of knew the intersection that we saw, but also that there was not always collaboration, that it didn't always go as seamlessly or as easily as we hoped. And we wanted to learn about how that type of collaboration or cooperation was showing up in giving circles and collective giving and political homes in different places. You know, as we kind of entered into it for ourselves, we saw our experience, but wanted to kind of more formally understand what the experience was of others. So with Philanthropy Together, we have kind of worked on a survey to help answer that question. And the kind of design of the survey is really focused on the experiences and challenges and questions that giving circles have faced and navigated when it comes to social justice and movements. And so we're exploring kind of questions about what giving circles are already doing and what we might be able to learn from the many giving circles that are kind of working on these issues and along with these values, as well as kind of what folks are interested in learning more about. If there's things that you've heard today or in general that you are kind of interested in exploring from the world of social justice within your collective giving, where you kind of want to hear more about that. Additionally, we want to do additional programming like the discussions that we have benefited from here today. And we're definitely will be doing one in January that will kind of build off of this conversation. But we'd really love to do additional programming, and we want to better understand kind of what resources and programming would be helpful for giving circles that have an interest in social justice or in movements. So we know social justice can mean different things to different people in the giving circle world, and we want to better understand what it means to you. So I think that ISIS has kind of dropped a link into the chat. We'll also be including that in our follow-up communications. But if you are in a giving circle and you have any interest in social justice, whether or not it's something you feel you currently embody or would like to embody more, please do take a moment to fill out the survey and let us know your thoughts. So I kind of, again, want to offer my thanks for Mario and all of our panelists, and let me turn it back to Sara to share a little more.
Thank you, Seiji. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, all of our panelists. This has been such an amazing conversation. And as Mario said, this is the first of an ongoing conversation. And the hour went so quickly when you're talking about love and power, and something that Priscilla said, that, our people are not victims. We are, full of assets. And I I want to ask everyone to, if you can spare, you know, a little bit more time to stay with us, because our panelists will be answering a third question. And if not, you know, we will be sending the recording afterwards, and the link to the survey. And I'm going to pass it to Mario. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and see you in January.
And thank you, Sara, for creating this space. The final question is, well, just to say, when I'm my most cynical, I worry that we're asked to see ourselves primarily as givers and financially givers, that we're being invited, when we do so, we're sometimes being invited to the wrong playing field, the one where the other side wins, when it's just about money, the one where our greatest strengths are hidden to us and by us, and the one where the wealthiest individuals have the currency to dominate that playing field or to take up more space and to possibly find political cover. My last question for all of you, and in service to the audience we're designing for, who will leave this conversation and sometime in the near future come together with their giving circle or possibly form one, what conversations would you encourage them to have when they do get together with each other? And if, but let's say when, for our purposes, we meet again with them, what would you love to discuss with them coming out of those conversations? I'll let any of you all, we'll go popcorn style here for the last round.
Cool, I'll be the first popcorn to pop. You know, I'll say this. I think it's important to recognize, because I think sometimes the process is for people who become involved in giving circles, there's a sense of, in some cases, satisfaction, and the process grows. They want to be able to do more, and they move further into the field of philanthropy. There are a few things that I think it's important to recognize. Number one, giving does not absolve you of other responsibilities. Giving financially does not absolve you from other responsibilities. That means that I find when I have the ability to share financially with other people, we want to make sure that the school, that a bunch of parents are interested in creating, and we'll give to that. But that also means that I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm holding accountable the public school system that continues to destroy the minds of young Black children daily, right? It does not absolve me of that responsibility. You do not give, wash your hands, and walk away and think that you have done it. That's not it. That's not it. And so I encourage you to ask yourself, whatever issues that you may find yourself drawn to, attracted to ask yourself this question first. What are, or what is my individual or collective relationship to that issue? Because that's going to inform how you move. That's going to inform how you give, right? And then the second question is, if you really want to impact that, fund it like you mean it. Give like you mean it. And if you grow into philanthropy, that is something I want you to always stick with, because the world of philanthropy gives sometimes to appease, not because they want to see change, but they want to be able to say that we gave to this particular thing, we gave to this initiative, it went in our books, nothing was really done, but you know, it shows up in our history log there. So fund it like you want to see something change, and make sure that it's a reflection of your values, and make sure it's a reflection of how you see you want to be able to change those things, and recognize you got to do more. And when I say you got to do more, recognize that the people that are outside in the streets that we're talking about in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in Portland, in Atlanta, and all of these places are putting their lives on the line. They're putting their lives on the line. Sometimes we got to do more than write a check. The check is certainly a good place to start, but it does not absolve us of other responsibilities to contribute to transforming this world.
Beautiful, thank you. Who's next?
If you're talking, you're on mute, Eric.
Okay, I guess I'll give it a shot. one of the things that I learned from my years working in the Bronx with CAB, Organizing Asian Communities in the refugee neighborhoods, was that philanthropy tended to want refugees to be good and deserving subjects. In order for us to get them adequately funded, we had to kind of not just make the case of their oppression, which is easy to do by looking at, like, you know, the structural realities of their lives, but also we had to kind of represent them as good and deserving figures. You know, people who were noble subjects. And then as I began to study what exactly refugees do to survive poverty, what I noticed is that those who actually decided to just take the money and run, meaning they took the grant from the Refugee Resettlement Foundation, they didn't necessarily pay the rent with that grant because they knew the nonprofit that was sponsoring them wouldn't evict them anyway. They decided not to go to these ESL classes, which they thought were a waste of time because they'd never learned as much English as, you know, a working poor person who grew up in this country to compete with them for another working poor job. That those unruly or bad refugees, they tended to do better. They survived. Their communities, you know, were stronger. Their families were stronger. In other words, the people who were a bit more unruly and didn't play by the rules, that resisted what liberalism demanded of them, did better. And what that taught me is that there's a part of us who, whoever we are, who are in the philanthropic world, that needs to have a real conversation of what it means to fund the previously thought of as undeserving. You know what I mean? Like the bad refugee, the unruly subject. And I think that's a conversation I would really like for people to have moving forward. How do we think of philanthropy not as funding the deserving, but funding the people in resistance that are at times necessarily unruly, that are at times those who necessarily break the rules? I'll leave it there.
So I've been thinking a lot about this moment and how, you know, thinking about the millions of people that Lumumba referenced who took to the streets and were activated this year. And I'm also thinking about the millions of people who, you know, headed to the polls and also the ones who decided to sit it out. And there's just a real massive opportunity right now to organize all those people, invite them to be part of organization, and do that hard work of bringing all those folks into the fold, into our movements. There's, you know, I would say, just to build off of what Lumumba was saying, like, get to know who in your community is organizing, who's doing the work, and how. You know, it's grassroots organizations that, you know, all across this country that are going door to door in, you know, respecting COVID safety protocols and going block by block, and they're on the phones and running campaigns that are making a material change in people's lives, that are training people up, that are just building constellations of community leaders. Those are the organizations that, you know, that we, you know, that need the funding, that need the resources to be able to bring all these millions of people into the fold. And, you know, in any sort of situation where, you know, you're in a position to donate, you know, and give money, it can be a position of power and privilege. And I think all I would ask is, you know, trust the organizations that are on the ground doing this hard work, and don't try to dictate and don't try to restrict the funds. Like, I want to give my money for you to do this thing. Just let people do what they got to do, because we know best who are on the ground. Thank you.
I want to keep on popcorn really short because I feel like I agree with a lot of what's said. I think that I would love for folks to go back, and if they haven't yet and they're giving circles, have some conversations and do some study about power and organizing and the relationship to giving, and to consider, I agree with Lumumba that we can all do, if we can give, we can probably also contribute in additional ways. But one of those ways could also be organizing other people to join your giving circle, or to expand your giving circle, or to help someone start another one, so that we're engaging more and more people in regular action.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thinking about this year and the political opening that it was, it feels like we had the opportunity, if we think of this as a house, to get back down to the studs and really examine, like, what is this house built on, versus kind of just remodeling, right? And as a society, it feels like we've done that. I'm super grateful to the four of you. I don't know, like, this call was just super helpful, reminding me of what are the studs, what's the frame on which I want to build up my own life, my own organizing, and what was true 17 years ago is true today. When I grow up, I want to be more like each of you. So thank you. Thank you to Philanthropy Together. Thank you in particular to Ilyasa, Isis, and Sada for putting this together, creating the space for us to be more human in public in front of this audience. Thank you to Seiji, Ligia, and Joelle for coming together and just doing this thing. And to all the people who joined us today, who will join us via the recording, to the 53 people who stuck it out with us. Thank you, and hope to see you all again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Mario. Thank you, everyone.